Hey all, Andy here, helping you build a career you love. Welcome to the show. Great to have you. Today we're going to be talking about job interview prep. I think it's a pretty fun one. I'm going to try to do it as quickly as possible. Get in, say hi. If you're here with me live, we're going to do a Q&A at the end of the show, just like we do every week. Let me say a quick hello, and then let me dive right in and tell you what it's all about. Donna, great to see you. Steve, Craig, Adam, Stark from the other side of the pond. Love it. Sebastian, what's up, man? Where you been? My Argentinian friend. I haven't heard from you in a while. Don't you love me no more? MJ, Cheryl. Apparently I'm in the echo chamber right now. Miss Detria, and everybody else. So today we're talking about job interviewing prep, and dare I say, I think most people that I have encountered in my life, they do it backwards. Job seekers generally approach job searching backwards, right? They think about what's available, what can I take, instead of where do I want to go. They think about what can I do and how can I bring that to the world, instead of what does the world need, what do I want, and how do I make that happen? And what I notice in the individual coaching sessions that I have, not to mention the questions that I get week in and week out from you all, my dear community, is that most people are when they get into a job interview, they're worried about how am I going to respond to this ridiculous inventory of common questions that interviewers or employers generally ask. Can you tell me, I'll just show of hands in the chat, who prepares like this? Because what happens is, as a career coach, and I help people prepare for their interviews, and I do that on a one-to-one basis, probably somewhere between 10 and 15 times a week. So a couple of people a day I coach, whether it's on their job search direction or their interview prep or their negotiations with their job offers. But inevitably, a lot of the people that I coach when they're looking for interview prep, it's, Andy, hey, I need to know how to answer this greatest strength question or this greatest weakness question or disagreement question or what my value is going to be. And they think in terms of what interview questions is the employer going to ask, and what in my background should I talk about? What should I say? Instead of what does the employer actually need me to accomplish, and what in my history, story-wise, is going to best illustrate that I can do that for them, right? Show of hands. Is this common, right? And who's exhausted from trying to figure out, based on either a job description or a list of questions or whatever, this is what I'm going to say for this, and this is what I'm going to say for that, and this is what I'm going to say for that. And you're trying to peel stories from all over the place. It's exhausting. It's actually hard for you to remember everything, and it takes a lot of time, but it's also highly ineffective. So today we're going to talk about how is it that I get you to spend the least amount of time to be prepared. So I'm not talking about not being prepared. I'm talking about how do I spend the least amount of time being fully prepared for my job interviews. Okay, so that's what we're gonna talk about today. So let's get in. I got 5 points I want to discuss. Steps I want you to take. Now, we're not going to go deep into the steps, because the main thrust of today's discussion is going to be how I want you to look at and approach the interview prep, because each of these steps is, I could make this talk 3 hours, but each of these steps is going to require some effort on your part. So let's get into it. First thing is, instead of what are the common interview questions and how should I answer them, right? I want you to think about this. What do they need? What do employers need? And what are my most important accomplishments that will illustrate to them that I can help them achieve that? Okay, so I want you to think in these terms. And I've talked about this at length in a number of videos on my YouTube channel as to how to think through what is it based on my function is it that employers are generally going to want, right? If I'm on the marketing team, they're in some way, shape, or form going to want me to help them generate more leads. They're going to want me to help them generate more leads at the least as inexpensively as possible. They're going to want me to generate leads as inexpensively as possible, and they're going to want the highest percentage of conversion rate from a lead to a customer, those kinds of things. So each of you knows what this is, and if you need a little scoot to try to figure that out, I created a video, I don't know, a number of months ago called Resume Revolution. Writing tips and AI tricks to elevate your resume. For those of you that are using my material in the free domain, there's a YouTube video that will get you thinking about, well, what is it that they need, right? What are my accomplishments that are going to most greatly align for me to show my value to them, that I'm going to help them get to where they want to go, because I've selected the exact precise experience, stories, answers, whatever you want to call it, in my background that's going to show them this. If you are in my job search coaching program, you have access to my super duper resume writing workshop. It's in there. I also have it in my interview intervention 10th anniversary training program. So number one, I want you to think about what is it they need and what are my most important accomplishments. Because when you do this and you start to identify these areas over here, all of those silly questions are going to magically fall into your most concentrated, most valuable experience. And I'll show you what I mean by that in a minute. All right, so that's number one. Number two, next thing is, after you think in general about what employers are going to need, I want you to look specifically. If there's a target company, is there that's supposed to say JD. I had to scratch these really fast at 10:43. Or sample JD. So maybe you haven't interviewed yet and you don't have an interview yet, but are you a project manager, and can you go find project manager job descriptions to look at, generally speaking, what are the most important achievements that I'm going to need to communicate to the employers to let them know I can help them get to where they want to go. So it's all about where they want to go and how you're going to help them get there, and you're going to use stories from your background to illustrate that you have the goods and experience. So I want you to look at the job descriptions. Now, I believe it was December 7th or 8th. It was about a month ago, maybe 5 weeks before we all broke for the holidays. I did a live office hour shows on how to decode job descriptions. And I'm not gonna go into the full-fledged thing. It was like a 45-minute discussion or something like that. But I do want to illustrate to you what I mean when I say look at a job description. So I want you to realize right now, I haven't even thought about interview questions. Okay, I haven't thought about my greatest strength, my greatest weakness, my disagreement. I don't care about any of that nonsense. What I do care about is, well, what is it that this particular company might want? And this is actually the job description that I used during that live office hour show about a month ago, where I talked about identifying inside a description. There are going to be things that the company wants you to do, and if you're able to do them, you're basically like everybody else. They're pretty neutral. There is green opportunities in the job description that if you have these types of skills, it's going to elevate your position and basically make you a little more desirable. But then the electric blue, if you have experience related to these particular areas in the job description, and I showed you how to break this down, you're going to be able to separate yourself. And I'm not going to go through this exercise again because I did that in full for you a month ago. But what I do want to show you here is, let's just say this is a program management office position. When I look at this job description and I'm thinking about how I want to prepare for this interview, or candidly, any interview I ever go on as a PMO individual or resource, or a senior project management resource, or an enterprise PMO resource, or something of that nature, somebody who is going to be managing a portfolio of projects. And I look at this immediately under responsibilities, where they talk about selecting, implementing, and improving the PMO tools and processes. Once I see that, that's all I need to know. That's all I'm going to concentrate in this particular example, because I know if I have the experience that shows them that I know how to do that and I've done that, and the closer I can get to the bullseye, as in, I don't know if you noticed it, but business intelligence and some of these other areas that this particular company was concerned about, aligning to corporate strategy and things of that nature, the closer I can get to what they need, the greater the likelihood that they're going to want to hire me. Now, there is a relationship between figuring out what that story or stories is that you need to use in order to illustrate this. But number one, it's fewer stories than you would imagine. So I want you to, in these cases, look for the bread and butter areas, the high-powered areas, identify, let's say, 2 to 3 power stories. In this particular case, I could single-handedly win this job interview and beat out all other candidates by having one completely well-packaged story. That means one answer to one question, and I would totally kill this interview. Okay, and I'm gonna show you what I mean by that in a second. So, as an example, if I'm thinking about how I want to prepare for the interview, I'm not worried about my greatest strength. I'm not worried about my greatest weakness. I'm not worried about any of that nonsense. I'm thinking to myself, all right, if I can show them soup to nuts how I have established a PMO. Now, everybody this company is going to interview, every person is going to be able to set up a PMO. Otherwise, they're not even going to talk to you. So everybody's paperwork is going to say that. I don't have to worry about that, and I already know that. But have I engineered from scratch a PMO of a decent size? If I have done that, I can be pretty sure I'm going to get hired, especially if I did it from scratch. If I didn't do it from scratch, the next best thing is, can I drop it down one tick mark and say I established or streamlined or improved one that was of a pretty decent size scale? If I have that, I'm in a win too. All right. So when I think about what it is that I'm going to tell them, I'm going to talk about my major initiative. Now, I want you to think about something. How long are your interviews, generally speaking? Right? 30 minutes, 60 minutes? Maybe you're spending even a little bit longer, but generally, if you're spending longer with somebody, you're going deeper, right? So you don't need nearly as many stories as you think you need. That's first. Second thing is, you don't need to remember a lot of stories, because if you have an understanding of this one contained, or if you're a chief operating officer and they want to know how you set up a marketing engine, or how you set up a sales engine, or how you set up a service delivery engine, you're going to have one story for each of those. But that's not going to be a tall order either. So I want you to think about identifying those power stories. And then what I want you to do is I want you to package them according to my CAR technique. That's CAAR. And if you don't know what that is, it stands for, I want you to give them some context for the approach that you take. I want you to give them context first. The second thing I want you to give them is the steps you took, just the names of the steps, so that you give the listener a map. You tell them, I have a playbook. Everything every one of you has done, whether you're 22 or 72, is you have a step-by-step process for doing whatever it is you do. Reverse engineer that into a very easy to understand list of steps. You're going to give them the list right away so they know how many steps you're going to tell them. It also sounds like you're organized. It sounds like you know what you're doing. It sounds like you come with a playbook. Then you're going to go back and weave through your playbook and give them a little bit of information on each one of the stages and walk them through what you actually did. That's the second part of the approach. And then you're going to give them the result. Now, to bring this back to how do I take my 1 or 2 power stories, in this case, the example I gave you, how you established a program management office for an organization, and then looking at it from a CAR technique perspective, all you need to do is think about, in some way, shape, or form, because this is going to come up, because eventually they're going to have to talk to you about how you do this or how you've done this, is you want to say to them, there was this time I was in an organization, we were wasting a lot of money running IT projects that were run over budget because they didn't have a methodology. We were wasting money on the implementation of the solutions. It was costing us over $20 million in inefficiencies and overruns, not to mention that we weren't streamlining the programs in order of return on investment payback and accelerating cash flow and so on and so forth, and aligning it to the corporate goals and this, that, and the other thing. It takes about 15 seconds to say that, but you're giving them the context. What do we call that, right? In interview intervention speak, right? In my little beauty book there, capturing their attention. If you, in Andy's dramatic storytelling or Freitag's dramatic storytelling, we got any drama students? What do we call that? A rising action. You immediately want to give them why this was important, because just showing them that you understand that has elevated this to a senior business discussion. But what it's also done is it's given them the impression that you are important. That's why you were working on this. I know why you were doing what you were doing. I know the approach and the way in which you look at it and how you contextualize this stuff. So I came in and I did these 7 steps. You walk them through it, right? I had to do a diagnosis to see why these projects were being overrun. And I had to understand and see if it was aligned to the corporate strategy and so on, right? And you're going to give them the steps. Diagnostic. Then I set up the committees. I looked at the requirements. I evaluated the projects and so on. You zip through it, you take them through the story, and then you give them the result. Now, when you do that, and as you take them through this story, because it will be a major part of your interview, whenever they ask you any question, like, can you tell me about a major challenge that you overcame? Can you tell me about a time where you had to organize something? Can you tell me about your greatest strength? Can you tell me about how you add the most value? Any of these questions are going to get answered with this one singular story. Any question they ask me, they're getting that story. I'm forcing them into my story that's going to best illustrate what I can do for them. Any question they ask you can be peeled out of this. And as you tell them the story and they say, Andy, tell me about a time you failed, you pick a part or a step in that story and you tell them how you overcame a challenge. So every single question that they ask you is going to go back to the singular story that is most representative of what you have done and how it aligns to what it is that they need you to do. Who's tracking with me, right? Tell me about a time you had to influence somebody. I had to change somebody's mind about the sequence of the programs. Tell me about a time you had a disagreement with somebody. Well, we had a disagreement about which project to go first. We had a disagreement about what the best software tool was. Everything goes back to this story. And every single time you do that, it sounds like you have more and more knowledge of what it is they need to do because you've kept them confined into the scope and the area that you want the discussion. Do you understand this? I can run an entire 2 hours on one story if the story was juicy enough. So you don't need to have 18 stories. Goodness, don't do that to yourself. Think about, what is it that is my story or stories? How is it that I'm going to tell the story? And if you want to go and inventory all the interview questions and say, where in my story am I going to peel those samples? You do that. But they're getting my story no matter what. And the story of that PMO would take me about 3 minutes to tell and give it to them in its entirety if they didn't interrupt me. That's all it takes. It's not a long story. And you can jam a lot of information in 3 minutes, right? So I want you to think about that. And then, like I said, think about if you want to take listen, I'm guilty of it too, because you all want to know how to answer the failure question, or you want to know how to answer the disagreement question, or you want to know how to answer what's your definition of leadership question. All that nonsense is on my YouTube channel. Right? But I'm telling you, there's not one single person I would prepare for an interview that way. So I want you to then go and once you have your stories, then look at the list of common questions. You can do that. I give you all that stuff. And then think about what is important to highlight in all the silliness in all those ridiculous questions. But just make sure they fit back into your stories. There's no chance I'm ever going to go on a job interview for a PMO position and not tell that story. Whether I have to tell it front to back and then peel out the leaves off the tree as the interview goes on, or whether I have to start in the middle of the story and then bring them out to the full picture. Because I'm going to get to that story no matter what. I can count on it 100%. I will never fail getting that out. Why? Because that's the story that's going to make me win. And if I don't get to tell that story, I'm not going to win. So I'm going to tell that story no matter what. Okay, so just very quickly, I wanted to keep this down to 20 minutes. I'm at 19. Okay, ready? What do they want? And what's my most important accomplishment that'll do that? Get some sample JDs. Review a JD if you have a JD. Identify your power stories. You only need a couple. I prepped somebody who was going into Microsoft 2 weeks ago. He's like, Andy, you were dead on. That's all I needed. Package the story. If you're in Andy's premium program, it's in the interview intervention training program. If you're in Andy's Freeland, well, check the interview playlist. You'll fish that out. And then you can go and check off that you know what you'll say when you get asked all the silliness. 11:20. Okay. If you enjoyed that, click the like button. Make sure to share this with your friends. People need help. Make sure you subscribe to the station. If you're here with me live, we're going to the chat. If you're watching me on the recording, I'll see you next week.